Hi, everyone. This is Jenna Griffiths of Earth Uni. We have Dr. Bulyo with us today, Dr. John Buller. He is, John, I'm going to leave it to you.
Okay. Well, professionally, I'm a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and I'm also a naturopathic physician. And I also have degrees in music, piano, and composition. And I combine all three.
Yeah, and you started off in a fascinating way. I remember you recently, I met you while you were in Zurich. You've been teaching for the last 35 years in Zurich and all over the place. But you told me a fascinating story about how you were in that sound chamber.
Yeah.
Could you share that story about how it all
started? Yeah. In 1973, I went to work at Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital in New York City, and I was actually working for New York University. They had hired me to do research on what we call community transition, and I also was doing research on what we would call today post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was in my laboratory at NYU, and in my laboratory was a little room that was actually put there in the 1950s by the CIA, and it was a small room that was called an anechoic chamber. It means a room without echoes. It also means, from the lay perspective, it's a room that's completely and totally silent when you enter it, designed by engineers to have no external sound whatsoever, and also completely dark. And it has a nice place to sit inside there. It was very small. I want to say also you can find these anechoic chambers very large. They make them for cars and testing acoustics and so on. You can even Google them and probably find them in your area. But I happened to have one in my lab, and I had studied music. I was studying music with John Cage, who's a composer, I think one of the greatest composers of the 20th century. And he had told me about entering such a room at MIT. And all of a sudden I realized I have one right there in my lab. And so I was able to get permission to use it. No one had used it anyway. And while I went in, I sat down, closed the door, and I immediately began hearing sounds. It's supposedly totally silent, except for all that's in there is the sounds that you make. And at first I'd hear even little sounds of my clothes ruffling, or any my breath would cause my clothes to pop in certain ways. And then I began to hear the sound, a low-pitched sound of my blood circulating. And I could hear my heart beating, I could hear my breath. And all of a sudden I heard a very high-pitched sound. And John Cage had talked about this in his book, Silence. And that's basically the sound of your nervous system in operation. And I became very interested in this sound. And since I had access to the anechoic chamber over a period of over a year and a half, I would sit in this chamber anywhere from 5 minutes up to 5-6 hours at a time, listening to the sound, especially of my nervous system, and experimenting with different sounds inside the chamber, things that I'd bring in. And I think the main thing that we do at the moment, we work with tuning forks. And there came a time where I got in an argument with a person in New York City in a subway booth. And I'm from Indiana. We don't really argue like that. I have to train to argue like a New Yorker. And I didn't even know it, but I was upset. My body must have tightened a lot, but I had no consciousness of it. And I got in the anechoic chamber, and all of a sudden I heard my nervous system going, it's like chalk on a chalkboard. And I knew what normal was. And all of a sudden I realized that, man, I paid a high price for this argument. And then I felt my body tight, and I couldn't stay there for more than a few minutes listening to the sound of my nervous system. And the thought came to me, I could tune myself. I've got to get back in tune. And this was an intuitive thought. And I like to tell people that it's not a magical thought, because I'd already, I have degrees in music. I trained with Ioannis Xenakis, who was a Greek composer. I knew all about intervals, Greek music. I spent years already in silent retreats and meditating. So I had the base knowledge, but somehow putting it together happened all at once. And I ran downstairs. I picked up two tuning forks at the music store, which happened to be downstairs. I ran back upstairs, tapped them in the chamber, held them up to my ears, and my nervous system went from like like this to just immediately came into resonance or entrainment with the sounds of the tuning forks. And I knew right then and there that I was on to something. In fact, it took me probably 15, 20 minutes to even regain my normal state of consciousness because the experience was so powerful. So everything that I do in terms of sound healing really began all those in 1974 in a room of total silence and total darkness at NYU. And I'm still talking about it today. Oh, I don't hear you. No sound.
Oops, sorry, I forgot. I actually I muted myself so that it would be clearer. So now you've done the science as well.
Yes. Well, in those days, I was doing what we call phenomenological science, meaning that I just didn't go in the chamber to get high or anything like that. I was actually had a journal. I was documenting the sounds. I was drawing diagrams. I was constantly looking for a baseline. I was also experimenting with mantras at the time, and so on, and different forms of meditation in the chamber. So I was originally, and at that time, the only way to do it was phenomenologically. I was also taking, at the time I was focused on what we called interval of a perfect fifth, but over a period of a year and a half, I experimented with intervals of a second, a third, a fourth, a sixth, a seventh, the octaves. I'd actually even, in those days, had a special bone phone, they call it, wrap it around my neck. I got it at a store called Crazy Eddie's, and it would vibrate your bones to the intervals. And I'd spend all day or all night basically in these intervals and keep a journal. And so I was a little bit crazy, but I liked doing it. And then in 2002, I had the ability, thanks to a group of Wall Street investors, to go back into the laboratory and do more hard research, you might say, more reductionist type traditional research with biochemists. And there we began looking into the immediate effect of the tuning forks and also of sound in general on the nervous system, and specifically how certain neurotransmitters, especially what we call nitric oxide, is manifest from exposure to the sound. And we found that it just doesn't happen when you wait a half hour. It happens immediately, just as I had experienced the immediate effect in the anechoic chamber. So I published some research papers in this in the Medical Science Monitor. And then we are also now presenting this in different ways in some textbooks for medical doctors and psychologists.
Very exciting news. But from your perspective, everything is sound, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't say everything is sound. I like to say everything is vibration. And sound mimics everything. So, and sound has been used for thousands of years by every culture, whether it be in India, China, the Orient, whether it be in the American Indians, Native Indian, shamanistic cultures, whatever it may be. Vibration as sound has been used always to explore and understand consciousness.
So just going back to that sound chamber, when you went down to the shop, was it just where there just so happened to be only 2 tuning forks, or did you select? Did you think about the perfect fifth?
Yeah, actually, what I wanted was the perfect fifth. In the shop, they had a C and an A, which it actually is a Fibonacci interval, and it's close enough that, and I actually like C and A also. So I couldn't get the C and G. They had that's the 2 tuning forks they had. and over how I got. Do you want the story of how I got the CNG? Okay, because it goes along with when you find something, the whole world, the whole universe tends to help you. And I wanted to have tuning forks to my specifications, so I was speeding, as it turned, going upstate to a conference, a psychology conference in upstate New York. I was speeding, and a radar cop pulled me over, and he walked up to my window, and sure enough, he saw in my seat my 2 tuning forks, which I was going to show to my friends at the conference. And he looks, with his gun and everything. It's his holster, but he's still, police could be intimidating. And he says, "What are those?" And I mumbled out that they were tuning forks, and that I was a therapist at Bellevue Hospital, because I wanted to look legitimate. But he immediately said, "Pick those up, bring them up to my car, and sit down." So I'm sitting in his squad car. This is 1975. And he's, of course, no computers in those days, so he's calling in my license and so on. And he turns to me and he says, "What do you use those for?" And I blurted out, "To tune my nervous system." And I thought, this is it. I'm going to go to jail, And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, so I explained, the high-pitched sound in the nervous system and how the tuning forks would entrain it. And he said, "That's interesting. Let me show you something." And let me So he turns his radar gun to me, and he takes out a little tuning fork, something like this, and he has a thing he taps it on. But the radar gun also has a pitch, like a ee, and if he turns on a calibration pitch, taps the tuning fork, holds it to his ear here, turns the dial on the radar gun here until they match up. So he's basically in sync with his radar gun. And then he says, "You watch the numbers, I'll watch the cars, you tell me if I get them right." He said, he got every car going by the speed absolutely correct. And he said, "When I'm in resonance, when I'm in sync with my radar gun, I know the exact speed of every car as it passes. Can you explain this?" I said, I'm trying to. But I was really amazed. And then I told him, that I was looking for a company, someone to get my tuning forks that I wanted specifically for my research. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, he called me back with a company we use to this day to manufacture our biosonic tuning forks. Again, it's one of those strange stories. By the way, he gave me a ticket. I got a speeding ticket, and I wished I would have framed it, because to this day I think the speeding ticket means if you're working with sound, you should keep your head in the clouds and your feet on the ground. Or the New York State Troopers will ground out for you, basically.
Well, just think how much, you only spent a few dollars on that ticket, but it gave you much more.
Much more, right.
So today we're looking at ascension versus burnout. And, a lot of people I know are hearing all sorts of noises in their head. And you, in our discussions, said that the most common, is it the thing that people see, or I was thinking it would be a visual image, and you said it's sounds or voices. So yeah. I just want to bring us into there and drop it on your plate and leave you.
Well, I'm not sure. The most common form of hallucination is auditory. So people will hear voices or sounds.
I was quite surprised to hear that.
Yeah. There's so many books on it today. But basically, when I worked in the psychiatric hospitals, it was more so than seeing things, voices were telling them things and telling them what to do and so on. And the idea of hallucination becomes interesting from different perspectives. At the time, whether we were taught that we should help them get rid of the voices, or suppress them and so on, and we use drugs and so on to do that. But I became more interested in what would happen if I talked with the voices, if I began to understand them. I learned this through a psychiatrist. His name was R.D. Laing, and he was my mentor and so I began basically trying my best to get into my patients' realities, listen to their voices, speak with them, and I began to learn a lot from doing that. Of course, I had to do it pretty secretively because the main protocols at the time were not to entertain the voices or talk with them. But to this day, I think it's a good form of therapy to do that. And I don't do it a whole lot anymore. And certainly we have to discriminate or discern between, voices that could be hallucinatory, and some voices I listened to I thought were actually very real. But you have to look at them, from different perspectives to understand that.
When you were listening to them, were you asking the patient to voice them?
No, not so much. The patient was hearing them, so I would just say to the voice, who are you? Where are you? Where do you come from?
Okay.
Can you talk to me directly? I'm here. I'm not trying to get rid of you. And sometimes the voices could be a common psychiatric situations. They were abused as children, so they created voices to help them. They were, traumatized and so on. So the voices were there to help them. And as you get further into the voices, sometimes you find that these voices, are from perhaps other beings other than them that have access through them frequency-wise. So I began finding all kinds of different possibilities for the voices than what's traditionally we would think in psychology.
So you would say, "Who are you?" and then they would answer to your patient, and then the patient would relay back to you.
That's right. The patient is like a medium for the voices, and the patients were not used to being asked these questions because they're more like kind of get rid of the voice. In other words, now, I'm approaching that patient. These voices aren't good for you. We got to find a way to control them. Da 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 da. And instead of doing that, I'm approaching the patient and then saying, who are you? Who are these voices? I want to know more about them, how they got there, and so on. And I'm not saying, and these voices could be you, a part of you, making them up, or they could be actually external to you, and they're speaking to you in different ways. And not all voices people hear are bad. That's why I say majority, I think people are honest. You'll find 60-70% of the people have their inner voice. They listen to different things. And so with the psychiatric patients, we found some of the voices, would tell them to kill somebody or kill themselves. Those are the voices you want to be careful with. You better know what you're doing. But also other times I'd say, who are you? And the voice would say, I'm so-and-so, and I come from this particular time, and I have access to this person's body, therefore I need to talk. And so I'd have conversations. And I tell the voice, well, it's nice that you're doing this, but you're interfering with this person's life, da 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 da. And sometimes those voices will just leave.
You told a story about someone called Edward, or a voice called Edward.
No, it's not Edward. It's Douglas.
Oh, Douglas. Sorry, yeah. Douglas.
It's very strange. I was speaking with the patient, and one of the voices I was speaking with actually said, my name is Douglas, I'm from Scotland. And he was lost. And part of my thing was with these voices, that they weren't trying to kill somebody or something like that, was to basically, I say, talk them out. And so I would talk with Douglas, and he was just lost, and he was attached to the light of my patient, which is pretty common, especially with drug addicts and things like that. They check out of their body, so there are, we might say, disincarnate spirits, whatever, or energy forms that will attach to the frequency or the light. And so I talked with Douglas, and I managed to, Douglas left, and the patients realized that also that this voice had left. And I said, that's that. I kept notes on it. And I think it's a few years later, I was speaking with another patient, and all of a sudden, I said, who are you? He says, Douglas. I said, Douglas, it's Doug. I talked with you before. What are you doing in this patient? He said, I wanted to make contact with you to let you know that I'm back. I said, well, I thought you left. He said, I did, but I came back because I want to help people get back to the light, and I want to help other voices like mine that are lost. And so I began this relationship with a being, a disincarnate being. We might say in some terms a light being, and his job was to talk. In other words, it's like a 12-step entity program to help talk these voices back to the light. And there's a way that we do this, and therefore Douglas and he eventually put together a team. They could do all of this without me having to focus on it anymore. So that's why I say I rarely even talk to the voices anymore. I allow a team at another frequency level to do the work.
Wow.
Now,
Okay.
I know speaking as a scientist, that sounds a little strange. And I certainly don't want to, go before my licensing board and tell them this, but I do tell the truth, and that's the case.
I'm impressed that you were actually mentored directly by R.D. Laing.
Yes, when I was working at Bellevue Psychiatric, R.D. Laing came to Grand Rounds. I didn't even know who he was. And mostly Grand Rounds, I would go to Grand Rounds to go to sleep, because these guys would read their case studies, the most boring things in the world, and I just wanted off the ward and out of the hospital, so I go to sleep. And one day I started to nap, and all of a sudden there's R.D. Laing, and he's under the table with a schizophrenic patient talking to him. And I was going, oh my gosh, this is something else. And this is like not someone reading a paper. This is the real thing on the spot. And he was talking about how you have to get into the patient's reality to know the patient, da, 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 da. And all of a sudden, I would say there was 60, 70 doctors in the room. And in the end, we were down to, I think, maybe 4 or 5 of us underneath the table with R.D. Laing talking with the patient.
Wow.
And that began my relationship with him, which really kind of because I couldn't go to England, but whenever he came to America, I was always with him, and we would correspond and so on, and talk on the phone if possible.
So I guess that was the origin of your therapeutic alliance concept, which I think is brilliant, and practitioners in all fields can learn a lesson from you there.
Well, I think so. I think R.D. Laing was ahead of his time, and I think that the scientific concept now of a therapeutic alliance and what we call mirror neuron systems, targeted empathy, all these things were the basis of R.D. Laing's work, which at the time, because I met him in 1974, was unheard of. He was called the anti-psychiatrist at the time also, because then you were not supposed to get into the patient's reality. You were supposed to, from the outside in, basically control the patient and follow certain protocols. And Laing was basically saying all of that is useless unless you can actually be in touch with the patient from the inside out.
Great. So, John, can we move to sound? And, there are all sorts of tinnitus and other sound. Yeah. I mean, there are all sorts of pitches, and how can people tell the difference? And what are the differences and things like that?
Well, my main thing with sound has to do with just a C and G tuning fork. It's one of my main focuses, and how quickly people can get a result. Because in our time, I call it, scientifically, it's called accelerated living, which means that we're moving so fast, meaning that in our great-grandparents' time, something new would happen, and they would have a whole lifetime to adapt to it. in our reality, in our time, something new happens, and we have 5 to 7 years, and something new happens again, and very shortly it's going to be 3 to 5 years. So, I mean, I was just when I was in Miami leaving, and I saw the senior citizens, more elderly people, at the iPads or the app, the JetBlue check-in. They looked like deers in the headlights. They could not adapt. They just sit around. They get angry. They look off into space. It kind of looked like a psych hospital in some ways, because we're challenged all the time to have to change, have to adapt and change. And we need to have more of a place inside of ourselves that we can go to shut off all of that, to regroup and so on. And in modern research, we would call that mindfulness. It's really meditation. It's learning how to relate to change in a new way. And I found that this using the C and G tuning forks are like an instant meditation, even if it's for a minute or a minute and a half. You will get results immediately. The science is there. And it's something that trains your nervous system so that you can essentially, if you're like, for instance, if you're in a car, you want to shift gears. If you have a gear shift car, you have to push the clutch in. You have to disengage in order to re-engage. And the tuning forks will disengage you and teach you how to do that. And then you can instantly re-engage. So, and it's a neutral way of reaching people beyond their belief systems. You reach them beyond anything, new age or anything like that, because you're just dealing with a couple tuning forks that no one has any associations with, and yet it has a very, very powerful effect on their nervous system and their life, because nobody's trying to change them. But after they get into tune, you'll find that they will eventually change themselves from the inside out. So I call it inside out healing, because sound goes directly to the brainstem, and all of a sudden you're changing yourself, your belief systems, your thought systems, and so on, your way you eat, everything will change, because it's just a natural part of living, versus someone telling you to do it.
Because you're more in alignment with.
Yeah, you're in alignment with yourself. I mean,
Yes.
You are who you are. You're your own nature, and no one has told you how to be, how to act, or anything like that. There's no. And by the way, as a psychologist and a naturopathic physician, I've had times in the beginning of my career where I thought I could tell people what to do. You should try this, do that, eat this, eat that. And in the end, to tell you the truth, I don't think it ever worked. Just tell someone, oh, you should stop smoking. My favorite is, do you go to your doctor? Well, you should eat differently. If you don't want to have heart problems, they say all these things, but there's no technology beyond words to help. And so the idea of telling somebody what to do directly logically is a nice thing, but in the end, they have to change. We say they have to change their inner sound, their inner frequency from the inside out. And then they'll restructure their world, they'll repattern their world to fit that particular frequency or sound.
Okay. So with regard to some people, I'm not sure if she's with us today, but there's an opera singer whose husband fell off the stage. He was also an opera singer, and then suddenly had tinnitus. I don't know. Are you with us at all? If you are, you can unmute yourself. Okay. Well, do you want to just answer that? I think she's not with us. Mm-hmm.
Well, I can talk about tinnitus.
Yeah.
And first of all, if there is structural damage to the ear, I think you just have to minimize that. I don't think you could get rid of that. But most cases of tinnitus aren't really structural damage. They have a lot to do with stress, with tightening your jaw, with tightening the coccyx, your tailbone, the perineal diaphragms. That's at the base of your spine. And when you tighten, we think of tinnitus as being with the ear, but it actually begins in the perineum. and so when you tighten at the anus, when you tighten the perineal diaphragms, it really goes up the anterior ligament of the spine directly into the limbic system of the brain, pulls into temporal bones, tightens the jaw, and eventually the pitch of the sound of your nervous system that you hear through your ears will go up. For example, you could, in the anechoic chamber, I could say that everybody has the sound in their nervous system. If that gets loud and overbearing, that's what we call tinnitus. But I could take anybody on a really quiet night, tune them into it, they're going to hear a high-pitched sound. So, so one of the methods I have of working with is just simply, instead of fighting it, meditate on it, and listen to it, and begin to merge with it and find out what it wants to be with you and tell you, perhaps. The other methods I have of working with it are basically to take what we call an auto-tuning fork, and we put it on the coccyx, the sacrum, the ASIS, or the anterior superior iliac spine. We put it at the vagus nerve, because I think the vagus nerve has a lot to do. It's called your social nervous system with tinnitus. And then on the jaw, and you combine this with a little bit of good body work or touch work, especially good cranial or osteopathic manipulation. And sure enough, you'll find that sound, if there's no structural damage, will begin to diminish.
Great, because that vagus nerve starts at the back of your head and then it comes around. But I picture it actually goes right up into the ear.
Yeah, there's a branch of it called Arnold nerve that goes directly into the ear, along with the trigeminal nerve. So we can reach it through auricular therapy. You can reach. That's why people rub their ears sometimes, I think, if they get under stress. And they also go and hold the back of their head and things like that. They're intuitively going to where they need to go. In medicine, they'll make a vagus nerve stimulator. They'll implant it right in this area of the body, and they'll use it for depression and epilepsy. But I think that a tuning fork, properly done, for the average person, is really going to prevent what I call sort of normal petite mal phasing out epilepsy we all have, or headaches, migraine headaches, and so on. Because migraine headaches also have a lot to do with the tightening of the perineum, spasm in the colon, which the vagus nerve goes to, coming up the anterior ligament of the spine, up the vagus nerve, and compressing at the occiput. And sure enough, you begin to diminish oxygen supply to certain parts of the brain.
So that's fascinating that it all starts at the perineum.
I think the perineum, we say as above, so below. The idea of the cranium and the perineum, we tend to, well, first of all, when I studied anatomy, I was taught separate parts, and I studied cadavers, and nothing moved. But in human anatomy, and real anatomy, and living anatomy, everything's in motion. I like to say the sonic body, everything's vibrating. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the idea of the sacrum or the coccyx being far away from your head is ridiculous. They're all basically one vibrational field. So the idea of as above, so below, as inside, so outside, really is a good guideline for a vibrational body. Therefore, to treat the sacrum, the coccyx, the hips, and so on for tinnitus is not so absurd when you begin to see the connections.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. So, and sometimes those high-pitched sounds are from other frequencies. Do you, sometimes you might even have people who are going through mystical experiences, or
of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah, mystical experiences to me are normal. So I think it's more that these. I mean, I was talking with Raymond Moody. He's the one. He did the books on what happens. People who have near-death experiences, and they always are hearing sounds. They always are hearing these high-pitched sounds, and the sounds, because the world itself is sonic, so therefore different frequencies will attract us in different states. And these frequencies, when we listen to them and become them. So we think of listening as I'm listening from the outside in, but when you listen correctly, the sound isn't outside of you. You bring the sound inside of you. So you're listening to the sound from the inside out. And therefore, these certain frequencies will definitely, when listened to this way, affect our consciousness. And our consciousness basically is how we perceive, how we reality test through our senses. So the idea of an alternate reality or different realities or mystical realities are just, to me, is normal. We can move in and out of these realities as we need to. I need to do it with my different patients, but personally, I'm not interested. I don't think that moving in and out of them will make you a better person. I think it will teach you how to shift gears, how to be more flexible and creative. But the reality that you really want is the reality that's best for yourself, for your friends, for your family. So when I get home, I'm not going off to journeys to outer space and talking to mystical people and so on. I'm playing golf, hanging out with my kids, and having a good time.
Yeah.
If I need to go to these places in the name of service for my patients, basically in the name of service, then I'm flexible enough to do it. I don't deny it. I'm sure that it's all there. But even past these images of maybe past lives or aliens or whatever is still just frequency. It's just that we're in a vibrational reality. We're in a multidimensional vibrational reality where basically we can travel, we can perceive the world in different ways, and different cultures basically have different ways of perceiving the universe. If we think that our cultures in the West are probably the best, then we become very not humble. We become arrogant. Whereas there's other cultures like the Sonoy Dream Tribes, for example, who have a whole other view. The indigenous people, the Hopi Indians who I work with, have a whole different view. That doesn't mean their view is better or worse. It means that there's one of many. And in our multidimensional vibrational universe, there's trillions and trillions of possibilities of realities.
Okay. Do you see it almost like David R. Hawkins' levels of consciousness, levels of mind?
Yeah, I think, levels of mind. Well, mind, we say, is an interesting term. Because when I speak in German, they don't have the term mind. So I always have to think about what that word means. But
Yes.
really, we change our mind, we change our consciousness in a way. We say that thought leads energy and that mind structures thought. So therefore, mind oftentimes is considered to be geometric in its nature. Because mind structures our reality. I had a patient at Bellevue once. He came in and he said that he just got back from the 11th century or something like that. And I was on the ER, I was admitting. And I said, well, that's nice. And what were you doing there? And he talked about what he was doing there. And I said, well, you know where you're at now. And he said, well, I always transition here. I'm at Bellevue. I always transition from other time zones to Bellevue through Bellevue Hospital. I said, that's nice. I said, and now that you've transitioned, can you know, we have subways in our time? He said, oh, of course. I said, that's great. So at the end, I realized he could eat. He knew how to navigate the city. He could think and so on. I said, great, you're free to go. And then later I talked with my senior psychiatrist, and I told him, he says, oh, Bob, where did you come back from this time? So everybody knew him, except for me.
In fact, you've written a book on all your stories from.
Yeah, I tell some of those stories in my Bellevue Memoirs book.
I'll have to put a link underneath this call to all your.
But it also, it just made me understand that the concept of mind, and at least as a psychologist, where as far as if a person can navigate this reality, in other words, whatever your culture is, if you can navigate it safely and correctly, that's the bottom line. You know, you can do what you want. And when I remember when I first got to India, I thought everybody there should have been in a psych hospital. And then I realized, wait a minute. Then I got to India, early India, back in the 1970s, early 70s. And I thought, this is the craziest place I've ever been. And then I began to question, by the way, my understanding of mental health and normal. Because in their culture, there were definitely many, many people that I thought were crazy, that needed help. And yet they were perfectly normal in that culture. I had a man with epilepsy. He'd go into epilepsy and he'd come out of it. And he would start channeling all kinds of spiritual information. And hundreds of people would come and listen to him talk. And then I began looking more into epilepsy. I used to call it the spiritual disease in the West. So they had a whole different view of epilepsy than we'd have in the West. So, you know, I became a little more humble about my understanding of consciousness and the mind and our Western diagnostic categories. And certainly R.D. Laing didn't believe in any of them. And I just came to the place, I said, if somebody's suffering, they're the ones that know it, and they should have help. In the extreme, if they look like they could hurt themselves or somebody else, we have to impose ourselves on them. Other than that, we're free to go to any dimension, any reality we want, whenever we want.
That's a good thing, you know, like be grounded and fly, you know.
Yeah, that's right. We can be grounded and fly, and we have to say, what's the value of going to these different places? You know, if you're looking for something or what, you know, you may find it there, you may find it something, you know, but the flexibility is what's most important. And we don't deny other people's flexibility.
And I've heard you speak about sound being a way to get to higher states. Or, you know,
well, sound it's been used for thousands of years. I don't like the word higher states. I kind of like the word many, many states. And sound has been used for thousands of years in every culture, except perhaps, and even a little bit in Western medicine, but not much. Somehow they began to use it with Mesmer. Freud and Charcot used to use it, gongs and tuning forks and sounds, but Western medicine lost its way when it got too materialistic. But in every other form of medicine in the world, sound and music are one of the most important tools, one of the most important therapeutic applications that they have. And they're literally used both for spirituality and for daily problems and how to deal with them. And we get very unhumble, meaning that we're arrogant sometimes, because if you think about it, if you go back 2,000 years, people had heads, they had arms, they had legs, they had brains, and they had stress. And you would say, well, the Romans are coming. You know, you're living maybe in Israel, the Romans are coming. And it's even worse then because you had like a whole year. They're on the march, but it's going to be a whole year before they get there. So you're probably having anxiety attacks, panic attacks for the whole year. And they had doctors then, and those doctors had to figure out what's going on. So they developed a whole different way and view and understanding of it. They didn't have the biochemistry, but they certainly had the ability to develop therapeutic methods. And when Hans Selye, the founder of modern stress theory, came, he recognized this. He said, in fact, all he had done with modern stress theory is add the biochemistry, but the other doctors before him had figured all of this out. You know, so again, in medicine, there's many, many different ways to perceive the world. This is the body and the mind. There are many realities that we can explore. But still, the bottom line has to be healing for the patient.
Yes, yes. So with most of these noises, they can be healed with reducing stress, or by, as you said, working with the lower, you know, working with sound and using, working with relaxing the lower part of the body.
Well, yes, I think it comes down to an integrative approach. And I think all the ancient physicians also used an integrative approach because we're going to work with sound. We're going to work with what today I like to call cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive mindfulness. You're going to work with being able to meditate, using sound to meditate, and so on. Still very much part of yoga and other spiritual practices. That you're proactive in your healing. You're not going and getting a pill. You're not going and saying, oh, I got a problem. What's the simple answer? What you're doing is you're preventing the problem from coming. It's very hard to prove what you did, what you never get. And yet we have all the science to show that if you do certain proactive practices, both meditation, mindfulness, yoga type practices, whatever form it may be, if you learn a new relationship with the problems in your life, and you create a good community, you will find that your chances of having many what we call medically diagnosed diseases are definitely reduced. And there's no doubt about it. The research has shown that your chances of certain things happening are less and less and less. So the idea of preventative medicine doesn't really kind of exist in modern medicine, but it definitely exists in all these other medicines. And I think that sound, for me, is both preventative. It should be integrated with these other methods, and also at the same time, because I am trained in the traditional kind of medical approaches and naturopathic and psychological approaches. If somebody hasn't taken care of themselves, it can be used with other methods, other therapies, to make those other therapies even more effective. But I prefer people prevent rather than having to see me.
You're a rare doctor. So John, just going back to sound, in your book you talk about mystic states also having like high-pitched sounds, like mystics. Is there a difference between those sounds and other sounds, and can those ever be switched off?
Well, again,
we've lost you.
Reason, for exploring these sounds, and and basically, if your reason seems to me that you're doing this to get away from something in your life that you don't want to deal with, I don't think it's a good idea, because really the real mysticism to me is you take the daily challenges of your life and you learn how to have a relationship with them that's mindful, that's respectful and honorable. You learn how to convert those challenges, we'd say, from poison to nectar. And so you basically learn how to take the stuff of your life that you don't like, and you learn how to burn it within yourself, within the alchemic furnace of yourself, and convert it to light. And then you will have true mysticism. The idea of seeking out mystical states is fine. People obviously take drugs, for example, take LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca, and if it's done in the right context, it can be healing. But in general, people take these drugs in order not to do what they need to do. Whereas for me, ascension, the real mysticism, is how I relate to people in my life, how I deal with my problems, how I learn basically to have a new relationship, a productive relationship with everything around me. So the mysticism's everywhere. And when you do that, distress becomes what Hans Selye called euphoric stress. So now through resolving these issues in your life and being more mindful, you will have automatically more euphoria, a completely different physiology in your body. And that physiology will allow you to be far more productive, more healthy, and serve much better.
Great.
And then you will, by the way, then you will ascend. You ascend naturally, and you ascend through good, what I would say, a good relationship, good work, and you should do that which is most valuable to you. So that when you act on something that has value to you, and this is the New Age says, if you do this, it's a magical kind of thing, and da 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 da. The truth is, when you act on something that has value, you always are taking a risk because it's so precious to you. If somebody says, I don't believe that, or they betray you or something like that, or they criticize you, it hurts more. So I would say that you have to have a whole new relationship with hurt, with pain, and so on. But you still must continue acting on your values. And like I say, when you're in tune, it's much easier to do that.
Great. So I don't know if anyone here has any other questions. Michael, do you have a question, or would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes. Actually, I have a whole bunch of questions. How many hours do we have? But no, I think the one that comes up is what are the, if you look at the general thing that we're talking around, which is the influence of sound on the human body and our well-being, what are the implications for the world that we live in today versus where we've come from and where we're going to? So, for example, when I step out into the street today, 2017, I assume that I'm exposed to a whole lot of noises, different frequencies, right, that I wasn't exposed to 100 or 200 years ago. And today is different than it was maybe even 30 years ago, which was the cusp of the introduction of computerization. So what are the implications of this evolution, industrialization on our well-being?
Well, I think, I by the way, I love the question. That's what I get all the time. And there's two ways of looking at it. Like you can look at a poison way, or you can look at it as a transformation way. And I look at from the transformation point of view, in that if we learn how to mindfully listen, we develop a new relationship with these sounds. Mm-hmm. And there's two pathways that we hear. One goes to the amygdala in the brain. That's what we call the fear center of the brain. And so if you, for example, were to hear a high-pitched siren or the beep, 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 horns honking, those are sounds designed to activate the amygdala. And sometimes they could be really imposing. And what happens is they activate, and then we walk around all day mad, or they interrupted my life, or why do we have to do this? And that's guaranteed, by the way, if you walk around all day like that, to cause heart problems, to cause neurological problems. It goes on and on and on. So your relationship with the sound is one of anger, hate, I don't like, I feel overwhelmed, or depressed because you can't do anything about it, and complaining about modern times and little do you know, probably your ancestors didn't like the sound of horses or something. I don't know. But there's probably always something somebody didn't like. But my understanding is more the second pathway of hearing, and that bypasses the amygdala and goes directly to the auditory thalamus, or the center of your brain. And so if you were to hear, say, a car horn honk, or say, my favorite is the beep, beep, beep sound of carts in airports, because I'm in airports all the time, and it's really high-pitched beeping. And the purpose of the sound, on one level, is to warn people that in fact you better wake up, because we don't want to run over you with our cart. But if you're sitting in the chair meditating or quiet or something like that, it wakes you up and gives you fear when you didn't want it. So the beep, beep, beep sound goes by, and sure enough, it activates my amygdala. But then I've learned how to say, wait a minute, and relax. And as I relax, I can allow that beep, beep sound to take the auditory thalamus channel. And all of a sudden, I'm listening to these sounds that are just carrying me to altered states of consciousness that are maybe possibly congruent with Paracelsus' concept of brain stars and ventricular systems and so on. And I'm learning from the sound. Now inside the sound, I'm now not fighting it, and it's becoming something mystical at that point. So the very sound that would give one person, excuse me, poison, would give me euphoria. And I think it's the only way to deal with the modern world, because you can't control a lot of these sounds. So you have to learn how to be with that sound and have a new relationship with it. And then the mysticism of the sound will take hold, because now you're inside the frequency. And that frequency is, for instance, at one level, it's a cart going by, but at another level, it's something else. It's in a vibrational universe, and many things can happen when you mindfully listen. That I call them normal, but most people don't mindfully listen like that, so they're not used to it, or they're afraid to let go into it. So
I like the expression you use, to have a new relationship with it. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe it's something. Well, it obviously is something for me to perhaps consider the next time I go outside and I'm exposed to an undesirable noise.
Well, remember, you can only control what you can control. I mean, you can either get upset, beat yourself up, complain forever about the government, get depressed, or you can have a different relationship with it. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't politically fight to get different environments and sounds and this and that changed. But if you can't control it, you might as well join it. For the moment.
I think there's a general reminder there about how to live life more generally. So,
exactly. Yeah. I'd rather live and have a good time in the airport than sit there and get to where my destination and feel angry, compressed, upset, stressed out, and mad at the airport and all the people that made the beep, beep, beep sounds. So I get to my destination and I've learned more about Paracelsus, alchemy, mystical events, other planets, and so on.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. You're muted.
So, has anyone else got any questions, Laura, or anyone else?
Yeah, just one, Jenna, actually. I just wanted to ask if John has found that there's a particular frequency level, like a scale of numbers or frequency value that he's come up with consistently that tends to be the universal healing frequency. Maybe something along the lines of like what Dr. David Hawkins was talking about, his calibrated scale of frequencies.
Yeah. For me, that's C and G. It's not so much the frequency, a single frequency, as it is two frequencies combined to create an interval, the space between two tones. And I like the idea of mathematical accuracy, because if you have, it's called a ratio. So I use a C256, a G384, but what's really more important, if you took 256 over 384, you get 2 over 3. You could take a ratio, means you could take 20 feet over 30 feet, you get 2 over 3. So you could take even other frequencies, and what matters is 2 over 3, that ratio. And in a vibrational universe, the only way to really define, no matter where you're at in the continuum, 2 over 3 is going to be 2 over 3. So the ratio has an accuracy, and I think it's been around for a long time. It was considered by the Taoists to be the perfect interval of yin and yang. It's considered in Hinduism to be the perfect dance of Shiva and Shakti and sound. And you find that in every Native American tribes, and you go to Peru, Brazil, all these, you hear the shamans drum. They will always drum a 2 against 3 polyrhythm, which is exactly the same as a 2 against 3 interval in what we call the perfect fifth. So, and that's what we did our research on. We're looking at the ability of 2 against 3, or the interval of 2 to 3, to produce a nitric oxide and anandamide type responses in neurotransmitters. So I call that basically the interval of human tuning. You can debate that if you want, but at least I'm defining it. I'm saying what it is. You have to experience it. And that's to me, the most important thing is you get a therapeutic alliance with somebody, you give them that sound, you'll find immediately what happens. It's going to have a positive outcome.
Yeah. And do you find, sorry, there's just a train going to go by, but do you find too, John, that if you look at the indigenous people of the past, who, as you say, previous cultures way back in history, they all used sound and all kinds of frequencies, vibrations, and so on, especially in their ceremonies. Sound. Is it the same?
It's the same. It's the same. They did it in their cultural context. Yeah. So that's why we have to be a little careful in our cultural context. So if I pull out, so some of my patients, a crystal bowl, they might think it's the devil's instrument. Or if I pull out a drum or rattle, it's not to say that a drum or rattle or these things aren't very effective. It's a matter of, do they activate the amygdala? Do they activate belief systems about the instrument itself? For instance, when I was a kid, if I brought a sitar into my house, my parents would have thought, "What the heck is that?" They would have, they would have had associations with the instrument. Whereas if I brought a guitar in the house, that would have been all right. So I'm always, and if you come to my studio, you're going to see every bowl instrument possible in my studio. But when I work, I primarily use basically 3 tuning forks, and I'm happy. And I try to be as neutral as possible to stay out of any belief systems or activating anything like that. But again, if I'm in a culture in Brazil and they have their instruments that are native, those are the ones I would use for sound healing, because they would be perfect for that culture.
John, can you show us those instruments?
They're behind me, kind of on a rack. Let's see. I don't know if you can see, there's a lot of them here.
Okay.
But basically, these are tuning forks, like so. Some, I don't have them, some have weights, they're different sizes, like so. And I can control the frequency. In other words, if you have the tuning forks, you never have to tune them. You don't have to be a musician to use them. So that's why it's called sound healing and not music healing. And they're basically instruments that could be used and learned quickly. They could be integrated into normal healing practices. They could also be used at home with your children and so on. They're safe. And and I make extra, primarily I like C and G and what we call an auto fork with weights that you put on the body. But I make a lot of different ones for different tunings and experiences for sound baths, what we call sound baths today, or sound immersion experiences. And again, but for therapeutic reasons and for the general person, I think a couple of tuning forks is all you need.
Great. Well, yeah.
And again, these are meant to be neutral. Because you can tell, I find very few people who have adverse reactions looking at a tuning fork, and there's they don't have any associations with them other than tuning an instrument or something like that. And for most people, you say, "I'd like to tune you like I tune an instrument." It makes sense to them, and I don't work in a new age sense. I work with, very, very blue collar people, sometimes very sick people. I work with all different cultures, all different belief systems. And I've certainly found that the tuning forks as instruments for sound healing transcend, intellect. They transcend jobs and professions. They transcend belief systems and cultures. They're universal. Whereas if I'm in, say, India, or I'm working with native indigenous type cultures, they want to bring out rattles and drums and so on, I love it. I am all for it. And I think they also have the similar effects of the tuning forks. For instance, I think gongs were the original tuning forks. But if I start playing gongs in my healing practice, I'm not so sure how well it's going to go over. But that doesn't mean that gongs aren't healing. I just don't want to spend all day teaching someone to be neutral with the gong. That's all.
Okay, great. There's somebody who was going to be on the call who is incredibly sensitive to electromagnetic fields. Like, she can't be anywhere near a cell phone, for example. She's just hyper sensitive. Could sound healing help her?
I think so. But again, that's an individual case, and what we're really talking about in today's world, you're always near a cell phone. So there's no way you can go anywhere in this world without having 8,000 trillion Wi-Fi networks running through you and so on. We don't live in the world of our great-grandparents.
This is her problem, yeah.
There are trillions of new frequencies in our world. Those frequencies are vibrating through us. They're changing us. We are becoming, I like to say we're transforming into different humans. I speak at Google and places like that. There's no doubt in my mind that we're basically the children. I have children. I have twin boys that are of the computer era and millennials. And certainly the computers are crystals. Computers are conducting frequencies. Your iPhones are conducting all kinds of frequencies. And once you learn how to become more flexible, more quiet inside, these frequencies will move through you more effortlessly. And you need to have less fear of them. But for those who are having fear, then we need to have more of a specialized approach. I would help her as a patient to learn how to find a calm spot in herself, to explore this, and to explore it in ways that aren't intellectual. They're very nonverbal. And then as she becomes stronger inside, the frequencies coming from the outside will pass through her more easily.
Oh, fantastic. That's a great answer. Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? I realize we've overrun our time, John, so I don't know if you can take one more question or not.
I can. I'm well today. No more air conditioning, so I'm happy.
Does anyone else?
Jenna. Hi, Jenna. Hi, it's Thelma. This is Thelma in Hong Kong.
Ah, Thelma in Hong Kong.
So yes, can you hear me? Hang on a second.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Can you hear me? Oh, that's probably better.
John, can you hear?
I can hear her. I can hear Thelma just fine.
Okay. Okay. Oh, some butter will be nice. Drop some butter on your throat.
Yeah,
it's probably
I know.
Anyway, I was just wondering because meditation, and that they say the chakras. I don't know if you've worked with chakras, and they say that they have a frequency, but the top chakra, the one at the sacrum, at the fontanelle. Have you had, or do you know the frequency of that chakra? The top one at the top of the head. Have you had any experience with any patients or anyone?
Yes. Well, first of all, the idea of there being exact frequencies for the chakras, it never appealed to me as a scientist per se, as something more as accurate. The idea of the chakras as the 5 elements, ether, air, fire, water, earth, always appealed to me, and that the concept of the third eye as a coordinator for these 5 elements has always appealed to me. And the idea of what we call the crown chakra is really to get into the crown chakra, you have to balance the 5 elements, and we have to constantly be doing this. So every situation in life, that's what I talk about, beating your challenges in life. Every challenge requires a different repatterning of how you express these elements. So sometimes you have to be more fiery, sometimes more watery, sometimes more earthy. And if your nature is to be, say, your nature is to be more earthy and solve problems by logic, this is how it is, then we organize it better, that can become both your greatest strength and your greatest weakness. Because maybe some problems you can solve that way, and other problems you have to be more vocal, more outgoing, other problems more meditative, other problems you have to hug people to solve them, they're not logical. And the moment that you solve these problems, That's when you get euphoria and you ascend through your ether chakra. Everything's balanced, so you ascend through your what's called your third eye, which is your limbic system, basically coming into the core brain. The vibration is sent through the third ventricle, the cerebral spinal fluid, and automatically your brain's lighting up with nitric oxide at that point. And then you enter what's called the crown chakra, which is really you enter a field of infinite frequency, and you have this moment that you've learned something from your challenge, and you have this moment to put that together in this infinite field and bring it back into your life, to integrate it. That's my understanding of this, and that the concept of chakras is, they really means to me, they mean spinning wheels of energy.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah,
and each chakra could have different mantras and so on. And of course, I loved studying all these mantras, the Bija mantras. But what I learned, and you know, and if you go to India, my favorite was when I studied the Bija mantras, I'd ask different gurus, and I saw a lot of them, how do you pronounce them? Everybody had a different pronunciation. And everybody had and I knew the ones that had the right pronunciations of the gurus I didn't want to be with, because because you're dealing with frequencies that are beyond our normal physical ability. You're dealing with frequencies that are like in string theory and physics. These are frequencies that are coming together to create the very universe that we live in, to weave patterns. So knowing them in a physical way, or trying to define them exactly in a physical way, doesn't really, I think, do them justice.
I get it.
Okay.
Yeah, the answers. I've been meditating for 34 years, 35 years, and understand the chakras. I just wanted we talk about sound. It's very interesting to I just wondered whether or not you'd encountered this sound or a frequency or a sound, and it's quite interesting. I just find it very interesting because sometimes when I feel like my Kundalini is coming up, especially through the throat chakra, I hear something.
Yes.
And then when it gets up to the third eye, and then it's very interesting that I just sort of I was just fascinated by this sound, and just wondered whether or not you had a version or an opinion of this.
Well, I do actually, and I agree with 100% of what you're saying. I think it's fantastic. Again, we're talking different languages in a way. We talk about the Kundalini rising, and of course, if I say that to my friends in medicine,
I know.
But I
personally, we say the energy.
We say you say the word energy, they think you're nuts. But
I know.
You say the word vibrational universe. What's even more stranger, we know that we're in a vibrational universe from quantum physics, but they think you're nuts. In other words, medicine has a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah.
But when you say sound, there's no doubt about it. There's sound, and in psychology now we call it a feeling tone. And that feeling tone goes directly to the limbic system of your brain. It actually does create a sound. There's no doubt about it. That sound can be experienced as a sound, as a color. It can even come as a form, as a vision. But underneath the vision is going to be the sound, the frequency that gives rise to it. And that frequency is in other dimensions many times. So therefore, it can have a frequency in our dimension. But usually that's why I like intervals like C and G or C and E, because intervals are mathematically precise, and no matter what dimension you're in, the precision of the mathematics will apply. So I prefer that, but at the same time, in our dimension, in our world, we talk about the chakras, like earth would be a low pitch sound and so on, and the higher the pitch, the higher up you ascend. The chakras become like a keyboard from low to high. But again, they have, when they're working correctly, they're going to play the music of your life, and that music will bring you, the Kundalini will rise naturally, and you're going to
Oh, yes, she
experience,
does.
you're going to experience service to others. Because that's what we wanted to rise for. It's the only reason for it to rise.
Absolutely.
And that's what I call healing. And it's the highest aspect of any religion is service to others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Thank
hope
you
that
very
helps
much.
a little bit. But
Yeah,
I like
thank
to.
you. It's just very, very I'm very fascinated by what your work and your research, and I just, I'm very fascinated. Thank you.
And I definitely like Kundalini. I just think that we don't want to force it. We just want to use the situations in our life to nourish the Kundalini.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's brilliant. So we have a question here from Sam about how do you get started how can a person get started with sound healing or therapy?
Uh-huh.
So maybe how can they start learning it? Perhaps you teach it all over the place.
Well, you could, for me, first of all, I teach all over the world, and you can always find my schedule at my website, biosonics.com, and my workshop schedule is always there. Also, my books are on Kindle. They're ebooks. I think the easiest book is called Human Tuning. That's what I'd recommend the most. And soon there'll be Human Tuning Volume 2 will come out in September. So it's the first Human Tuning, gives you all the tuning forks. Everything we've talked about pretty much today is in there. And I also have videos, DVDs on sound healing. I think you can download them they're like $9 or $10 each. I made them really reasonable. You can study that way, and they go along with my books. And there's also a lot of free tunings that you can have access to there. I've made a lot of trance tapes with sound for my patients over the years. They're all free. They're all downloadable. So I do my best to bring that to whoever I can.
So I'm just showing people your website, which is biosonics.com, and showing them also that workshops.
Yeah, that happened last weekend. I got to catch up to this. I'm getting ready to go into my summer schedule. I'm taking time off.
And you'll be back in Switzerland next April.
I'll be at Switzerland and Germany next April. I don't know if I'll be in California this year. Usually I'm going every year, but this year maybe not. I'll be here in my Stone Ridge. I'll be doing classes in June and September, and a clinic, an educational clinic, probably in October. I mentor people with sound healing, and because I like to say we need to talk the talk and walk the walk. So I do clinical mentoring, and I write books, like I say, and I put out CDs, and I try to make things available from free clear through to things that I market, which keeps me going in terms of, it always goes back into the work. And I have articles and so on, all on the website.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, John, for being with us.
You're welcome.
And wishing you all the best with your work.
Good.
And people can get hold of you, can't they, through your website?
Yeah, you can always reach me. You can reach me through my website, but please, I can't do your cases. In other words, it's unethical for me without really seeing you or evaluating you or palpating or whatever to say you should do this for that and so on. I can only recommend things to read and things like that, but I can't take specifics. That's to your benefit that I can't do that. But if you are in a clinic with me or things like that, I can be a little more specific.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
And thank you, everybody. I send everybody a lot of light, and wherever you're at, either have a good evening or good afternoon or good morning. I don't. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.